going to get some good information from our next guest. He's Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, and I had a communication from Congressman Fortenberry's office today soon after he had gotten off a call with Dr. Fauci and Birx, I believe Vice President Pence, and also Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, and heard that there may be some valuable information there that he might be able to pass along from that phone call. And so we made some arrangements to get us joining us today, and he does join the Road to Recovery show. Congressman Fortenberry, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Jack. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate your good public service here and working to keep everyone informed. It's such a complicated task here with this national crisis, and there's so much suffering and trauma and uncertainty, but there's a lot of good happening. People, neighbor helping neighbor, people thinking creatively, innovatively, and we're here to help as well. And the federal government has undertaken a massive, massive effort to protect our healthcare system, to protect individuals and families, and to protect small businesses. So we did have that call this morning with the Vice President, led by the Vice President. And there was quite a bit of good information. So much is coming at people. If I could just say a few things right quick that were probably relevant to most people. If you have direct deposit, by the end of next week, the first checks will be arriving. As most people are aware, if you make up $75,000, you will get a $1,200 check in the mail and $500 for each dependent child under 17. By the 24th, there'll be movement of 24th of April. There'll be movement of the funds we appropriated for state and local communities. That's rolling out. Hospitals are receiving money this week. We moved about $100 billion to hospitals in that last measure. $30 billion coming this week, and that should be a great assistance, particularly to rural hospitals for Medicare payments. So those are some of the highlights.
Congressman, tell me a little bit more. I know that you also had the doctors on the line, and I do have some more questions about the CARES Act and applications of that. But what was the very latest that you had from the doctors in this call, and what their assessment of what's happening right now is?
They started out with great questions. They started out with some slightly good news in that Washington and California, which were early, where the virus assaulted early, the mitigation measures are working. In other words, the social distancing, the closures, as painful as that is, in Washington and California, they're seeing a decrease in the incidence of the disease. So, and it takes 3 to 4 weeks from the disease prevalence to actually for the conditions to fully manifest themselves. So, because Washington and California acted early and smartly, a decline in the disease is being seen. So that validates the idea here of, again, social distancing and closures in order to, again, mitigate the spread of the disease. So that's a little hint of good news. There are testing is rolling out. From my perspective, it's not fast enough. This is a key, though, to getting the nation, getting it validated as to who has it and who doesn't. But there's a new test out there as well, made in America, that actually determines whether or not a person has the antibody. In other words, if they were exposed to the disease but didn't have any symptoms and now have a natural immunity. And so I'd like to see that test roll out very quickly, and I think we'll see that on the horizon, and massive testing scale, hopefully very, very quickly. So those are some of the highlights that we talked about.
Congressman, what's I know there's been the CARES Act, obviously, and you were just talking about that, and that's been incredibly significant. It's been a big portion of what we've been talking about with our listeners, from filing for unemployment to getting some of the SBA loans that are associated with it. What is the conversation happening right now between Congress members about whether or not there's another iteration of relief? I know the president talked about that a little bit yesterday, at least as it pertains to the loans. And what are the things that you're looking at, if that happens, that might be included in something like that?
The third major effort of the threefold initiative was, again, to help small business. And the main program there is called the Paycheck Protection Program. We relied on the banking system, not the government, to manage this. So there's been a huge, helpful response from our financial system to be the portal, the gateway, by which small businesses can achieve this loan. If a small business has been adversely affected, the criteria are fairly loose. It is easy to get, easy to apply for, and we've seen very, very good success in Nebraska. Some wrinkles still being worked out. I've been in contact with banks even through the weekend to try to get their information to Treasury to get this rolled out. But the program basically is this. that if you keep people on your payroll, you've been adversely affected, but you still keep people on your payroll, you'll get this loan 2.5 times your payroll, your average annual payroll, and then a monthly payroll. And then you can keep 8 weeks of it, and then it can also apply to rent and utilities. So it's a good deal. A lot of businesses have signed up. It's helping a lot. It creates some certainty for small businesses because the idea here is twofold. Again, you've got to keep your healthcare system whole while we work aggressively toward better treatments, social distancing to make sure the disease doesn't overcome our healthcare system, building out additional infrastructure, working toward a vaccine, and at the same time, keeping economic well-being in good stead so that once we turn the corner on the disease, we can all get back to work.
Congressman, I have a question about the direct deposits. You said that people can receive payments through direct deposits. Do they have to sign up for that in any way? What does that look like, and what do people have to go through to sign up for direct deposit?
The Treasury Secretary said about 60% of people have direct deposit. So, and if they have that, their check should arrive by the end of next week, or the money should be deposited by the end of next week. Direct deposit is something you can work with your financial institution to set up, and your employer. So if people don't have that, there's a different set of processes.
Congressman, let me ask you this. I know there's been news that's come out this week about federal government ending funding for some coronavirus testing sites at the end of this week. I think there are some places where that means that there are going to be sites that are going to close as a result. I'm not sure if that's a decision that because they think that need is met via private options elsewhere. What can you tell us about that? Is that something that is going to be looked at? And how can we what needs to happen? Because I think you share the vision that we do, that when you're able to get mass testing and you're able to get what we see in places like Rhode Island and Georgia now, where they're doing 1,000 a day in a parking lot, 5 to 10 minute tests, you don't even need a doctor's note. That's what quicker recovery is going to look like. Are there things that the federal government can do right now to really exacerbate or to accelerate that situation?
Yes, moving the ability to rapidly determine or to use the test is one thing. There are advanced machines out there, and there's an inventory going on to figure out where these machines are to actually figure out how we can accelerate the testing process. Dr. Burks has just done a tremendous job with her calm demeanor and her scientific expertise. Went into that a bit this morning. So they do not have an inventory, if you will, nationally of where these testing machines are, and that will be a big help. She said that will probably be done by the end of this week to know exactly where they are. So yes, the key is to ramp up the manufacture of testing, to distribute that equitably across the country, to have the machines in place that can do multiples of these at a time, so that we can move from a few sites doing 100 a day to thousands or tens of thousands a day. Then normalize it by dropping the price, making it so easy that if we do have to continue to check people in the future as we go back to work, that it becomes a very simpler process. So that's the objective here, moving towards that type of capability. That's a bit of an open-ended question, and it's the right question to ask, because I'm in complete agreement. This is the key variable to ensuring of knowing who has it and who doesn't, who has the antibody and who doesn't. And by the way, this new test made in America can determine 100% who has the antibody, who has natural immunity. So they would be cleared. But anybody else who's had the test, you could still are susceptible to it, so we're going to have to probably retest. And that's going to take a massive amount of scaling again. The ability to get this done and being manufactured cheap enough so that it's viable for our system to absorb. That's the right question to ask. That's the right strategy to undertake, and we're some point in between.
Congressman, a while ago back when you were on a show talking about the CARES Act, you made a comment towards the end about the medical equipment production, about it being in China and the problem that's presented in this.
Sorry, gentlemen, did I lose you?
Congressman, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here now.
Okay, perfect. On one of our last times you were on our shows, we were talking about the need of medical equipment and its production, and you said you had some strong feelings about it being manufactured in China. And I was just curious on what those feelings were and what that looks like moving forward in your mind.
I learned a statistic this morning is very disturbing to me that every single glove, medical glove used in the United States is imported from overseas. Now, that's not made in China, but still. Just like we make medical equipment, just like we make our military equipment in America, medical supplies and drugs need to be made in America moving forward. This overdependence upon particularly China, who has a vast amount of control over medical supply as well as drugs and our drug ingredients, is got to change. It is a matter of our health and well-being. It is a matter of national security. This virus originated in China. China seemed more interested in controlling information than controlling the virus. It caused the worldwide pandemic. And for us to be dependent on this country that, again, was slow to respond, has still withheld information, is unconscionable. I imagine, and I certainly intend to have a leadership role in this regard, but I imagine Congress will be very open to considering how we have a new industrial policy around medical supplies, just like we do around military equipment, so that it is made in America and we aren't in this vulnerable position ever again. Right now, we are having to supply ourselves through our emergency management agencies by flying in this equipment and protective gear from overseas. We do not want to be in that position ever again.
Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, guest on the Road to Recovery show. Congressman, I'm curious because you're privy to these discussions, like this phone call that you had today with the experts and the briefings. And I'll just tell you this from the ground level here in Lincoln. I still have people basically every day who are saying, "Hey, the way even the local media is talking about this is overreacting, and everyone's buying into this overreaction to this entire thing." And you're inspiring panic when you tell people, that they need to social distance because it will keep them healthy. And I've still got that coming fairly frequently. What is your response, whether it's agreeing with that, disagreeing with that? What is your response to hearing that? Because I'm sure your office hears it as well. With the knowledge that you've got from actually hearing from the experts directly, like you've been able to do, how do you think about this whole thing?
I don't think we're overreacting. There are a lot of variables here that came upon us swiftly, caught us by surprise. We don't have a centralized mechanism of either governance or production. We are decentralized. We have local governments and state governments, local governments and state governments in charge of healthcare distribution and policy, and then we have private clinics and private and public hospitals. We also have laws that govern how the national government can interact with the authorities on a local and state level. So there's a lot of layers of complexity. So this is like an invasion of something that we didn't really foresee very well. And so we've had to manage through the constructs of what it means to be America. We want to keep in place our liberties, and that's obviously the objective here. I had this question come up earlier, but if we don't curtail certain freedoms right now, we have no liberty at all. This disease could potentially overtake us, swamp the healthcare system, and a lot of people could die unnecessarily. So all of us accepting some degree of inconvenience and participating jointly in sacrifice for the greater common good by keeping distance, by not going out unnecessarily, and if you're in a vulnerable position because you're sick or you're older, taking an extra set of precautions, perhaps with the mask as well. I think Nebraskans have been very compliant. I think for the most part, people see that this is a national emergency. There's always going to be, when you're throwing lots of money at a problem and facing something you never really faced before, mistakes made and lessons learned to be later. But it's better to be aggressive and active now to heal our nation first and simultaneously set us up for an economic rebound. And that's the purpose of trying to do these legislative policies in the manner in which I described. Protect our healthcare system, move funds to individuals and families who are in need of help, and then keep small business viable where most people work and have community. So it's a good question. It's the right question, and we ought to keep wrestling with it. But again, we're curtailing certain liberties in order to protect them, in order that they will be there as quick as possible once we turn the corner on this virus.
Yeah, this is me editorializing, but I absolutely agree. I think it's some prevention on the front end to get us back to what we all want to be doing more quickly on the back end, and we're trying to get that word out as best we can. I appreciate you giving us your time again on this. Good information. We'll look forward to talking to you again, Congressman. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being responsible and being out front on this. It means a lot to be in solidarity, particularly with the media and in this time of national emergency.